Have you ever wondered how coffee gets roasted? Well, today on Coffee or Die, we're gonna find out. Today on Coffee or Die, we find ourselves in a coffee lab with a guy with a beard. What is it that you would say you do here?
I'm Edwin. I'm a coffee roaster and Q grader here at Black Rifle Coffee Company.
What we want to do is kind of show people the roasting process. We want to go through what does green coffee look like and how does it get to the point to where it's those brown beans that we get in a bag and we're ready to drink and enjoy. To start, what does coffee look like when you first get it?
Yeah, it comes in a variety of forms depending on the processing method. So it can be like bright green, it can kind of have like some sugars and stuff like that, just depending on where we source it from and the processing method. But you can kind of see it kind of comes in this raw green. People call them beans, but they're actually seeds. Yeah. That's kind of what they look like.
So we can't drink that though. Like if we ground those up, it wouldn't taste very good.
No, it'd be very, very hard to ground first, and then it just wouldn't have those pleasantries that you get out of.
Okay, so we'd probably fuck up our grinder if we tried doing that. Okay. How do you figure out what coffees you want to get? Like when you start sourcing from different parts of the world, what are some things you're looking at as you're searching around?
Depends on the project we're doing. If it's like a core coffee that we're doing, it's the same coffees, we buy them year after year. Okay. So we're looking for consistency on those. If it's a new product that I'm working on, ECS or a limited time offering, we're just looking for very distinct coffees, coffees that are different that people haven't tried before. Yeah. So yeah, quality in cup. Looking for a certain moisture in that coffee, generally 10 to 12% in the coffee. We're looking for defects as well, stuff that's wrong with coffee, make sure that none of that's happening. I know with like a lot of farmers, before they get their crops, they'll try to figure out what the moisture percentage of that crop is before they decide they want to use it. Yeah. What happens with green coffee? It's if we start roasting it when it's outside of that 10 to 12% range, what could potentially go wrong? You can run into some issues. If you get shipped a shipment that's too high in moisture, say it's you're 14, 15, 16%, you can run into some issues like mold formation, mycotoxins could start to form.
Right.
So too wet's bad, too dry is also bad too, because it's just gonna roast a lot quicker.
So when you start evaluating the green bean, I guess this goes into your experience as a Q grader. You mentioned mold. What are some other defects that we might see in that green bean?
You can see anything from insect damage, chipped, sours, all sorts of other different things that can happen.
Okay.
Foreign objects.
And those will have a negative impact on what we end up tasting after it's roasted?
Okay. Yeah, some are minor, some are a lot more severe.
Let's figure out how to roast this stuff, because I'm eager to find out how it's done.
Yeah, so I've got a kind of a small batch right here. This is where all the coffee at Black Rifle's roasted, just right here in this room.
Yeah, just all of it, every bag through this little guy?
Yep. But whether it's a sample roaster or a production roaster, they all kind of go through the same process. Okay. Right, so we preheat the roaster, we charge it, which kind of makes the drum crash to a temperature. And we kind of got to turn around and we start a roast curve. And then it's kind of broken down into 3 phases when you roast. So we're taking that 10 to 12% moisture. The first phase, we're really just drying all that moisture out so we can go into the phase 2, which is the browning phase. And you start getting into that Maillard reaction, start caramelizing the coffee, building some of those flavors. Yeah. And then that's going to lead into the final phase, which is your development, which kind of kicks off with the first crack. That starts the time that you're developing the coffee, getting all those amazing flavors. Your first crack, you can go all the way up to second crack, for a super dark coffee, some people do. So I've got a small batch that I'm kind of roasting for a project. With this particular roaster, the hopper's directly above the top here. It's already preheated, so we're gonna charge the drum and basically bring it down, and then we're gonna be looking for that turnaround.
What temperatures are you usually preheating at?
For this one, we're gonna go 347. That's also gonna vary on the batch size of the coffee you're doing. If you're doing a super large batch that we do in Manchester, Tennessee, which where our production facility is, we're doing several 100 pounds of coffee at a time. Right. So we have to charge at a much higher temperature.
Okay. And you can see all the green beans in here just kind of rotating through here.
Yep.
So when you're going through this roasting process, are you relying on what's happening in that window to determine where you are with your process? Or what are some other ways that you're checking to see how your roast is developing?
Depends so with this model, most newer roasters, you can kind of pre-build a profile in there. Okay. So you can run it automatic or you can run it manual. So if I'm running this manually, then I'm kind of constantly watching it. Most roasters are gonna have this piece here, which is called a trier. So you can take out small samples of the coffee during the roasting process.
Okay.
So I can
So when you're using that, are you looking at what's visually occurring, or are you also smelling at what's happening?
Yeah, a little bit of both.
Okay.
So we're still obviously drying the coffee out, but once you start to get to that second phase, you start to see some browning. You start to smell like kind of like almost like a baked bread type of sensory experience.
And that goes back to that Maillard reaction that you were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And then you can use those inputs to, adjust gas, adjust, pressure, all sorts of other variables as well.
Cool. And I know that you were showing on here, you can kind of like follow these roast curves to figure out where you are as well.
Yeah, you've got your main roast curve, you got your rate of rise, and then you've got your, depending what sort of like heating element you have, you can track that as well.
So you got a few different ways of kind of watching and figuring out where your coffee is headed.
Yeah, definitely.
So do you already know what your roast profile is going to be with these coffees? Like when you dump them into this roaster, or do you kind of have a general profile you start with and then back off or add to, depending on like what you taste later on?
I never just wing it. I always have like a plan of what I want to do.
Okay.
If I'm evaluating a coffee, it's always going to be like a sample roast, we call it.
Okay.
So a very, very light roasted coffee, because with the sample roast, we're kind of just looking for defects. We're trying to figure out what's wrong with the coffee, see if it's a coffee that we want to purchase. Yeah. It's a lot harder to hide those defects in a lighter roasted coffee.
Okay.
Versus a dark roasted coffee.
Okay, so there's different characteristics that are being expressed depending on what roast level you're at.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
So yeah, sample roast is very basic. You're not bringing out a lot of the flavors of the coffee. You're mainly just looking for defects in the coffee. And then, production roast, you start to get into, am I going to roast it up to like, quote unquote a medium, but we use an Agtron scale to measure the color of the coffee.
Yeah.
So.
And what is Agtron? Like, what does that tell us?
So within the coffee industry, you'll hear like a lot of terms like medium roast, dark roast, French roast, full city, but what does that mean, right? It's all subjective. So we use a tool called the Agtron. That's pretty standard across the industry, and that just assigns a number to the color of the coffee. So if I'm roasting to whatever, an Agtron 60, I can tell somebody else, this is a 60 and it's a, same.
Okay, so it's just a common language. Like we're here in America, but a roaster in Europe, you could say Agtron of 70 and they know exactly where you're at.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just takes out some of that subjectivity. So,
Okay, that's really cool. So like what are some characteristics we start to like taste and smell the darker we get? Like let's start from like something pretty light to, as we get darker, what are we starting to taste and smell in our coffees?
So I'd say with the lighter coffees, you're going to taste more of the origin of the coffee. You're going to taste more of the fruits, the terroir, more of the like kind of the delicate flavors, I guess.
Right.
And then the darker you go, you start to caramelize, you start getting, caramel, you start getting, and the darker you go, you start getting dark chocolate, and then you can go all the way to like, you can go off the deep end, and you start getting like ashy, smoky, those kind of notes.
Right. And I guess another thing that most people might not know is like this is a huge fire hazard, right? Like there's some fire hazards that come along with roasting coffees.
Oh yeah. Every great roaster's kind of survived at least one good roasting fire in their career.
Wow. Holy fuck. That's nuts. Where's the marshmallows?
A lot of that's kind of maintenance related. You're not doing your proper maintenance. You're not emptying out the chaff, cleaning out the oils, that kind of stuff. The electric roasters are a little bit more forgiving. They have had some built-in safety features that kind of prevent some of those hazards.
Yeah. So what is the chaff? How does that end up being a fire hazard?
So in this, basically a byproduct of the coffee when we roast it. You can kind of see, I don't know if you guys can see that, but it's just kind of some of the shells and stuff like that come off. Extremely flammable. It's really dry.
Yeah.
So that's one of the main things that catches on fire that people run into issues with. This one's kind of cool. The way they built this is, if you do get a fire in this particular roaster, it's just going to burn down one of these chambers. I notice we're starting to smell a few different things occurring right now with this coffee. We've kind of passed through the drying phase, and we're starting to get into that browning phase, and what you're smelling is that Maillard reaction. You're starting to smell almost like baked bread or something of that nature. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as I understand it, like Maillard reaction, that's why bread turns brown. That's why coffee turns brown. Exactly, and you can kind of start to see that color change. Yeah, in the bean itself. We're still a little green, but it just, I think, goes to show that even at this phase in it, there are some aromatics coming off of this, and we are starting to notice, hey, that coffee is becoming a bit familiar. Yeah, definitely. And once you've been roasting for a while, you start to hit those benchmarks with your roasting plan. I want to hit, Maillard reaction around this time and such, so you can kind of make adjustments on the fly if you're roasting manually. Okay. Yeah, I know that with, like when we talk about
Q standards, SCA standards, we're kind of roasting to specific times. Like we want to produce our roast and have it finished and achieve a certain color in a certain amount of time, right?
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to go too far, or it's going to end up like baking your coffee. You don't want to go too short, or you're just going to have a very underdeveloped coffee.
Okay.
So it is a dance between, you know, heat and time.
Okay. And I know we were talking about the colors of the coffee before. Are we measuring just that whole bean, or do we also get a measurement of like what that ground sample looks like?
Yeah, we'll do both. Once it's finished and roasted, we'll measure the whole bean on the Itron, and we'll do the ground as well.
Okay.
And we don't want a whole lot of variance in between those two.
When does, and I know you were talking about the cracks in the coffee. You mentioned first crack and second crack. At what point are we gonna start hearing these cracks? Are they audible cracks?
Yeah, they're very audible, a lot more audible in the bigger machines.
Uh-huh.
So basically when we first start the roasting process, I'll probably screw this up, but the coffee is very endothermic, so it's just taking on a lot of heat. And eventually, you know, what's gonna happen is it's gonna crack. And as it becomes exothermic, it's gonna start releasing more energy. And it kicks off with that audible crack that you'll hear. Not so much in some of the smaller roasters, but you'll definitely hear it in this. You'll hear it in the production roasters.
Okay.
And that first crack is what really kicks off that development phase of the coffee.
Okay. Now, when you're sourcing your coffees as well, do you have a general idea of like what they're gonna taste like based on the region they're from and the processes that they undergo?
Yeah, most definitely. A lot of our consumers, they're really fans of, you know, Central South American coffees. It's kind of what they grew up drinking. So I have a pretty good idea what those are gonna taste like. I know what my Eastern and African coffees are going to taste like. I know what my Asian coffees are going to taste like as well.
Like Black Rifle sources a lot from Colombia and Brazil. Like what are some characteristics of like, I guess those regions that we could generalize and say, hey, you'll experience?
Yeah, Central South American coffees, washed coffees, you're going to experience just kind of nutty, chocolatey, just kind of flavors that you're kind of used to, kind of grew up drinking.
Okay, so when people tell me I like coffee that tastes like coffee, they're probably referring to something around.
Yeah, they're probably referring to a Colombian coffee or a Brazilian coffee.
Okay, and no, when we start getting into some other things, like let's say, I don't know, things from Africa, like what are some coffees there that like you might say are a little bit different than these South Central American coffees?
You know, you're going to start getting a lot of like fruits and stuff like that when you start talking about Eastern African coffees. Blueberry, you know, a lot of like just cherries, berries, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, a lot more fruit forward coffees, sweeter coffees, that kind of stuff.
Okay. And you were talking about like wash process before. What's the difference, I guess, the big differences in what we taste between washed and natural processes?
Now there's a ton of different processing methods, as you know. The three biggest ones, you know, you've got your washed, you've got your natural process, right? So wash is basically when they take the cherry, strip all the mucilage off and lay it out to dry on a patio or, you know, a raised bed.
Right.
Naturally processed coffee is when they're just going to take the cherries and just lay them out to dry in the cherry itself. So it's going to impart more of those fruit notes in the coffee.
That's really cool. And I noticed that like all of our coffee just emptied out of here. What just happened right there?
So basically we just discharged the coffee. Now what we're doing is you want to cool the coffee down as quickly as you possibly can.
Right.
Because you want to decrease the kind of post-development from happening. Because if you're not cooling it down quick enough, basically it's just going to continue to roast and you're going to continue to extend your development.
Okay.
So you could, in theory, finish, you know, at a 20% development, but your coffee's so hot and could still be developing in the cooling tray, especially on those larger batches.
And I noticed with this, we've just got that one arm kind of going around and around. Is that just assisting in that cooling process?
Yeah, so we're agitating the coffee and actually there's a fan in there too that kind of pulls some of the heat down and exhausts out.
Now, I've heard other roasters will spray some water on it really quickly. What's the idea behind that?
Yeah, it's a common thing that we do in the coffee industry. We call it quenching. Generally, you only need to do that in the larger production roasters because when you're roasting hundreds of pounds of coffee at a time, you've got so much energy in that drum that you just need the extra water to kind of bring that temperature down.
Okay, and it doesn't leave the beans wet or anything? It just...
No, we're talking, you know, not a significant amount of water, just enough to kind of cool it. It kind of instantly just kind of steams right off. It doesn't add a whole lot of water weight or moisture to the coffee. It's just strictly for cooling the coffee down. Okay.
And about how long did you say this takes to cool down?
With a good cooling tray, you're probably 90 seconds, 2 minutes.
Okay. So now we've got in here coffee that actually looks like coffee. This looks like something we might see like in a bag that we get.
So yeah, it's a real kind of light to medium roasted coffee. And basically what we're going to do now is just kind of, after it cools, we'll let it rest for at least 24 hours. If I'm doing a sample roast, I'm gonna wait 24 hours before I even taste it or cup it.
Okay.
If you were to go and drink this right now, it would just taste grassy, and it wouldn't be something that you're familiar with drinking.
Why is that? What's happening there?
Basically, it's just hasn't had time to degas. Hasn't had time to kind of finish developing as well.
Okay, and the way I understand that is like, if we were to taste this right now, it'd be like carbonic acid, like a flat carbonated water. It's
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
like what we
You get
experience.
a lot of those notes. You get like a lot of just like hay, grass, green notes, vegetable notes, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so now that we've got it roasted, we allow a rest period. At what point do roasters typically put it in a bag and say, hey, we're ready to sell this to a customer?
Depending on the size of the roastery, most people, in general practice, is like they'll degas for 24 hours, maybe.
Okay.
Up to 24 hours, bag it, tag it, and send it off.
I noticed that some roasters will recommend a certain period of rest for the coffee, even after they allow that like 24 to 72 hour period of initial rest to occur. What's this idea with, like, I've seen times up to 2 weeks where they're saying wait 2 weeks before you consume this coffee. What are they thinking there?
Yeah, there's definitely there's a sweet spot there, right? And depends on the roast level, like especially with this really light coffee. You know, you might want to rest that up to 10 days before you drink it. And also depends on the brewing method, right? If you're using it for espresso, some people like to rest it for 12, 14 days before they throw it on their espresso bar. Some of the darker coffees, you can get away with just resting it a couple days. Just develops a lot faster, degasses a little bit quicker.
Right.
You'll find like a lot of coffees, there's just like a sweet spot. You know, there's some coffees that taste excellent at 4 or 5 days. There's some coffees that I've tasted that taste amazing at 14 days.
Right.
So what I recommend to people is, you know, crack the bag, you know, and just kind of taste each day, see what kind of develops, and find out, you know, where you kind of like it.
So this all ties into that bloom that, you know, you like to hear a lot of people talking about. They love to bloom their coffee, but that all ties into this gassy bean sort of thing, right? There's just CO2 that's wanting to escape from this coffee. And that's really what we're doing with the bloom process, is just allowing that CO2 to escape.
Yeah, exactly. That's also a good indicator of how fresh your coffee is, right? You can you can tell by all those little bubbles in the bloom coming off your coffee as you're making your brew.
So we've gone from start to finish here. We've looked at a green bean, we've put it in this roaster, we've roasted a coffee, and now we have something that we would actually see in a bag. I think that's just really cool.
Yeah, this is obviously on a much smaller scale. This roaster, optimal batch size, about 600 grams. The production roasters we use in Tennessee, you know, up to 500 pounds per batch. So definitely a different animal when you get into that scale. For me, this is the fun stuff. We've got this roaster, I've got a sample roaster that I travel with.
Yeah.
That one does about 50 grams.
Wow, so they do get even smaller.
Yeah. What you'll find with a lot of producers with sample sizes of coffees, especially like very high-end lots, you only get a couple 100 grams on a pre-shipment sample. So sometimes the smaller roaster might come in handy for,
that's awesome.
For samples.
I think this gives people a good opportunity to see how coffee goes through this pretty complex process and brings something they can actually consume and enjoy every morning.
Yeah, I hope so. And then hopefully I can take you to Tennessee and show you how our production roasters work.
Man, I want to say thank you so much for letting us in your lab today. And I guess Tennessee might be the next thing we end up doing, huh?
Yeah, I hope so. We can go see the big boys.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, anytime.
Oh, dude, I can do like at least 10,001 pull-ups. Which one do you go for? You go for this one or this one?
I do pull-ups on the top one and then hangs.
So you just do pull-ups here? Do you put your thumbs anywhere?
No thumb reps.
No thumb reps? So you just go like this? No thumb even making contact, or?
Yeah, you can thumb stuff.
Okay, dude, I'll fucking crush this, dude. Look at how fucking strong I am. Oh. That's it, 5. That's all you get.